This is the town square of Ballykistine in County Tipperary, marked by lush green trees, park benches and street lamps. It's popular among the town's 5,000 residents for relaxing walks and recreation. These images are of course a product of the imagination, with the help of computer software, and they showcase something called transit-oriented development, or TOD, an urban planning approach that involves densification near transport infrastructure, giving residents a ready-made transport network on their doorstep. Ballykistine is the townland that surrounds Limerick Junction railway station, the only station in Munster with a direct train to the province's 3 cities, Cork, Limerick and Waterford, as well as to Kerry and Dublin. Located next to Tipperary Racecourse, about 3 kilometres from Tipperary town, the surrounding area doesn't see much activity, apart from horses racing and cows grazing. This is a shame, given that 48 trains stop at Limerick Junction station every weekday, making it one of the most connected transit hubs in the country. Transit-oriented development is a tried and tested method of urban development in countries like France, Sweden and Japan, and it's usually deployed along commuter rail lines to cater for a growing city. Like the rest of the country, Limerick is experiencing an acute housing shortage, but Ireland's discretionary planning system makes building within cities slow and expensive and difficult to do at scale. While Limerick Junction is in the countryside and in a different county, the station's 26-minute commute to Limerick's Colbert station renders a TOD viable here. Greenfield densification near railway stations holds promise because of the much lower planning obstacles and rail's incredible people-carrying capacity. One commuter rail line has the same throughput as roughly 20 lanes of motorway. Of the 35 kilometres of track between Limerick and Limerick Junction, 80% is single-tracked, which increases waiting time on the line. However, there are plans to double-track the whole line, which will help reduce commute times. For a TOD to succeed, it needs sufficient housing density within walking distance of the station. So with Limerick Junction, it's a case of go big or don't bother. For our models, we selected an area of 33 hectares to the south, all within a 500-metre radius of the station. This forms phase 1 of the development, with future phases dropping off in density with distance from the station. As for the racecourse to the north, we've put that beyond the scope of our plans. The first step was to upgrade the station and rename it Ballykistine, as it's now more than just a junction. We included electrified tracks, which do not exist at present, but this is optional. The central platform was widened and modernised with accessible ramps to relay passengers from the platform to the town via an underground tunnel, which caters for cars, cyclists and pedestrians. Upon emerging from the tunnel, we find ourselves on Lime Street, the town's main thoroughfare. The streets in our model are named after a type of tree they feature, and the lime tree, or Tilia cordata, is not to be confused with a citrus lime. The 2 main considerations for a TOD are affordability and mobility, but in this development we've included a third: beauty. Beauty is of course subjective, but generally speaking humans are drawn to streets that balance order and variety, which can be achieved with subtle ornamentation and allowing plot owners to deviate from an agreed design code. We've also gone to great lengths to deprioritise car use in Ballykistine, placing pedestrians and cyclists at the heart of our plans. Lime Street is mostly closed off to cars, apart from crossing junctions, and the first 3 streets to the west of Lime Street end in a cul-de-sac. The first of these is Birch Street. On one side there are typical office and commercial buildings. Across the street there are mixed-use buildings with service establishments, boutiques and other shops on the ground floor and apartments on the upper floors. The distinguishing elements are the colonnades that protect against inclement weather. These colonnades continue through Lime Street and onto surrounding streets. You can see the colonnade effect continue on Chestnut Street. For the architecture here, we drew on a mix of continental and Irish influences. This end of Chestnut contains residential buildings, but taking into account the proximity to Lime Street and possible high demand for services, the ground floors can be freely modified by the tenants into cafes and restaurants. The other end of Chestnut Street, away from Lime Street, has typical apartment buildings with a classic appearance. Aspen Street continues the trend of the area becoming quieter as you move away from the centre. On one side of this street there are still mixed-use buildings, but they turn into typical family housing as you move away from Lime Street. This is even more noticeable on the other side, where there are only residential buildings for the entire length of the street. Oak Street is a fully residential street, with no commercial outlets. It's well suited to families with children, especially since there is a school and places of cultural and scientific activity nearby. This brings us back to Lime Street, where we have the town's main secondary school. Given that Tipperary is a hurling-obsessed county, a ball wall was added to the side of the school, accompanied by skateboard ramps and a 5-a-side pitch. But how successful would a TOD be in reducing car usage? evidence from the US suggests mixed results in this department. Measures such as effective car parking pricing and road pricing would also likely have to play a role, while the number of parking spaces would remain a matter for designers. So, how could such a TOD come about? Where would the impetus for such a major development come from? In the US and elsewhere, TOD projects are usually driven by a mayor, but in a 2019 plebiscite, only Limerick voted to opt for a directly elected mayor, with Cork and Waterford narrowly voting against the idea. One person who has long campaigned for Limerick to have its own mayor is former Secretary General of the Department of Finance, John Moran.
At the moment, local government, so effectively led by the CEO, reports to the Minister of Housing. And that is really reflective of the policies that they are responsible for are really related to, roads and, pipes and housing, so to speak. Historically, all the rest of the powers have been taken back up to Dublin, security, education, etc. And a CEO is really in a reporting line that goes to the Secretary General of the Department of Housing and the Minister of Housing, who is, of course, but one member of the government. So if you're kind of trying to advocate for something that should be in further education, student housing, let's say, or you want something in health, you kind of have the wrong minister on your line. So the mayor is outside of that. The mayor is elected by the people who will have the ability to have meetings, in fact it's statutorily in the new legislation, with all the members of government.
Ireland's system of government can be thought of as vertically siloed or disaggregated, where the aggregation doesn't happen until you reach the very highest levels of government. A directly elected mayor provides local aggregation. One person with a focus on the county whose scope extends horizontally across areas like housing, transport and health. As we mentioned in our video on Cork, Ireland is an international outlier in how centralised it is, even among similar-sized countries. In Ireland, the councils have such little power that the public is apathetic to local government, and people sometimes confuse a mayor with the ceremonial position of Lord Mayor. Moving to a system of stronger, directly elected mayors will not be easy, as central governments do not relinquish powers without a fight. But even if there were a strong county mayor of Tipperary, how would a project like Ballykistine come about? Allow us to speculate. The mayor would set up a special body, which we'll call the Ballykistine Development Authority, or BDA, which would be responsible for putting in place the critical infrastructure and securing master planning permission. The BDA would then procure the services of designers and contractors, likely putting one master contractor in charge of each street. The master contractors would ensure that plot owners and subcontractors follow the design codes of the street, while meeting the affordable housing targets set by the BDA. For coordination purposes, each master contractor would have a seat on the BDA's board, as might representatives from national bodies such as the Land Development Agency and Irish Rail. And the council would ideally have the ability to issue its own municipal bonds, as is commonplace in other countries. Of course, there are many ways a mayor's office could go about such a development, and whether the people of Tipperary have the appetite for TOD or a directly elected mayor is another question. The good news is that the Government Act brought about by the Limerick plebiscite can be used by any county, and in the humble view of this channel, this is something that should at least be considered by every county.
One of the really important things for me in terms of supporting the directly elected mayor reform from the beginning, right, is it moves power down the system. Okay, so it first of all, if you think about it in Limerick terms, since we're the only city to vote for it at the time, now there's somebody in Limerick who in effect sits above lots of competing interests. So if you've got to find a resolution that involves the Department of Housing, the local health people, or maybe the bus airing, right? In the past, up to now, we had to go all the way to the Taoiseach before there was anybody to whom all those people reported, because you go up a hierarchy of people who all just want buses or all just want health, all the way through the ministers to the Taoiseach. Now we have somebody locally here in Limerick who can actually, in effect, be the referee of the various interests, but find a solution that actually works for Limerick. Now, that has a really important reform, I think, impact on national politics too. Because I think as more and more power devolves to, in this case, Limerick, to the council in Limerick and the mayor, the councillors, I think, become more interested in doing their job because they have more to do. They have more responsibility, they have more budget. And I would imagine, that we could start to see people who might say, I'll do the council job for 5 years, maybe for 10 years. They don't want to become a national minister. They want to make a real difference in their neighbourhood. So rather than volunteering to sit on the board of a charity locally, they effectively become a part-time councillor. And that's the way it used to work in the 18th century and the 19th century in areas, because we had power locally. The hard part is for the TDs, because they're used to being those people. Now what they have to do is effectively become national politicians and look at national politics issues. You coming in to say what you want? Yeah.
Whether it's hurling or local democracy, it seems that Limerick are the pace-setters, and we wish the county the very best in their mayoral election this June. We'd love to hear your thoughts on TOD and directly elected mayors. And if you'd like to chat more with us, please join our Policy membership community at patreon.com/Policy. Now we'll leave you where we started, in Ballykistine, Slán go fóill.